Rain came down like something that meant it. It had been falling since noon, cold and steady, drumming on the hood of the hired coach until the sound stopped being weather and became a kind of company. The road ran through low fields gone the colour of weak tea, and the smell was wet wool and hot horse, and underneath it the mineral bite of a brook running high along the ditch. She was called Margaret Ray, though almost no one troubled to use the whole of it. She was the kind of woman an inn forgot the moment she paid her bill and stepped back out into the weather. 26, plain-faced, a mender by trade, with hands roughened from good work, and a coat let out twice at the seams because there had never been money for a new one. Her father had built things that lasted, bridges and byres, and once a schoolhouse, and from him she had learned to look at a plank or a beam and know in her bones whether it would hold a man's weight or only pretend to. It was not a fashionable talent. It had never once made her rich. But she trusted her own eyes more than she trusted most people's promises, and that had served her better than beauty ever would have. She was travelling to a hiring 3 parishes over, a post mending linens and keeping accounts for a family she had never met, and she had not eaten since the inn at first light, because the coach fare had taken the last of it. The wheel gave out on a rutted stretch a mile past a stone bridge, and the driver said, not unkindly, that he could not go further tonight, and that she had best find shelter before the light went. She stood a moment in the rain, and thought that this was, on the whole, the sort of day that decided a great many things about a person, and that she intended to be decided well. That was when she heard the coughing. Before the story goes further, if you're the kind of listener who likes a quiet evening and a story that earns its ending, take a moment now and subscribe to the channel, so you don't lose this one in the flood of everything else. The sound came from beneath the near arch of the stone bridge, where the brook had backed up brown and fast against the pilings. She left the road without deciding to. Under the arch, huddled against the wet stone, was a boy of perhaps 7, and a man old enough to be his grandfather, a tinker by the look of the cracked pack beside them, both of them soaked through and shaking. The boy's lips had gone the colour of a bruise. His breath came in a thin, ragged whistle that Margaret had heard before, in a cousin who had not lived through the winter that made it. She did not ask whose fault it was that they were out in such weather, or where they had meant to be by now. She knelt down in the mud without a thought for her only good skirt, and put her hand to the boy's forehead, and it burned under her palm, though his teeth were chattering. He took a chill 3 days back, the old man said. His voice had the flat exhaustion of a man past arguing with the world. We've nowhere. The wheelwright turned us off his yard an hour gone. Margaret did not answer that directly. She unbuttoned her coat and wrapped it around the boy, and when that was not enough, because nothing about him looked warm, she took off the cloak beneath it as well, her mother's cloak, grey wool gone soft with age. The only good thing she owned outright, and she put that around him too. Then she pulled off her boots, sound leather, resoled twice, and worked them onto the boy's bare blue feet, though they were far too large, because his own shoes had rotted through at the toe, and there was nothing else to be done about it. You'll want them back yourself, the old man said, watching her with something between shame and disbelief. I've another mile only, she said. You've a night of this ahead of you. She did not say it as a kindness. She said it the way she might have said the sky was grey, a fact requiring no thanks. She sat with them a while under the arch, out of the worst of the rain, and told the boy a story about a fox who outweighted a hound by doing nothing at all but breathing slow. Because it was the only story her chattering teeth could hold together, and slowly the whistle in his chest eased enough that he slept. She gave the old man the last of the bread she'd been saving, wrapped in a handkerchief, and did not let him thank her for it, turning the subject to the road ahead and how far the next village lay. She did not see the rider. He had come down from the higher ground above the bridge, where the road bent through a stand of beech, on his way home from an unhappy errand of his own, and he had reined in his horse at the sight of a woman kneeling in the mud, giving away the coat off her back to a stranger's child. He did not call out. He did not think at first that it was any business of his to interrupt a scene that plainly wanted no audience. He sat his horse under the dripping trees and watched a woman with bare feet and no cloak give both away to people who could never repay her, and something in his chest, long quiet, turned over once, slow and unwilling, like a key in a lock gone stiff with disuse. He was not dressed as a man of consequence. He wore a plain drab riding coat, mud to the knee, no crest on the horse's tack, because he had been out inspecting a tenant's flooded lower field and had not troubled to dress for company. Nothing about him would have told her, had she looked up and seen him, that the man on the grey horse under the beeches owned the bridge she knelt beneath, the fields on either side of it, and the house 3 miles on where she was, though she did not yet know it, about to ask for shelter. She did not know that she had been watched. She did not know the name of the house ahead, or that the man who would open its door to her that night had already, from a distance, decided something about her that no amount of later cruelty would talk him out of. She walked on barefoot through the last of the light with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, and behind her the tinker and his grandson slept warmer than they had in 3 days, and she did not know then that the worst part of her evening was only beginning, and the best part of the rest of her life had already quietly, without her consent, begun as well. The gates of Thornwick Hall stood at the top of a long gravel drive, iron-scrolled and taller than any gate had a right to be, for a house that, from the road, showed only a few lit windows against the dark. Margaret had walked the last mile with her feet numb past hurting, and her dress stuck to her like a second colder skin, and by the time she reached the gatehouse she had stopped being able to feel the difference between rain and tears, which was, she thought grimly, at least efficient. The gatekeeper was an old man with a lamp who looked her up and down, and said the house did not take in strangers, not with the family the way it was, and she said she was not asking to be taken in, only to sit dry a moment under his own roof if he had one to spare, and something in the flatness of her voice, no pleading in it at all, made him hesitate. It was the man who came down from the house that decided it. He arrived on foot, with a lantern of his own, tall, hatless, his drab riding coat traded for a dry one, but his boots still carrying the mud of the lower field, and Margaret did not know him, had never in her life seen him before, and so did not know that she was looking at the same man who had sat his horse under the beeches an hour before, and watched her give away her cloak. "She says she only wants a dry hour," the gatekeeper said. The man studied her the way a man studies a fence line, quick and thorough, and said, "You'll take a fever standing there arguing about it." Then, to the gatekeeper, send her up to the housekeeper. "Tell Mrs. Pemberton I said so." "And who might I be thanking?" Margaret said, because she had been taught to ask, even with her teeth chattering. "For the trouble of an opinion on my health?" "Alden," he said. "I manage the land here." It was not a lie, not quite. It left out a great deal. He did not offer more, and she did not ask for more, and he turned and walked back up toward the house without another word, leaving her to wonder, as she followed the gatekeeper's lantern up the drive, what manner of steward gave orders in a tone that made an old gatekeeper move at once, without so much as a glance to confirm it. Mrs. Pemberton met her at the servants' door, with a face that had clearly refused a great many strangers in its time, and was working up to refusing this one, until she got a proper look at Margaret's bare feet and the state of her hands. "Mercy," she said, which was not what she had meant to say at all. "Come in out of that. Come in." The kitchen smelled of banked coals and yesterday's bread, and, faintly, of the beeswax used on the long table, and Margaret stood dripping on the flagstones while Mrs. Pemberton fetched a blanket and did not ask a single question until there was dry wool around her shoulders and a cup of something hot in her hands. "You'll be wanting to know why a woman comes up a Duke's drive with no boots on," Margaret said, because it seemed only honest to say it before it was asked. "A Duke's drive, Mrs." Pemberton repeated, watching her carefully. "You did not know that then, I did not," Margaret said. "I was told I might sit a dry hour. I've no wish to be more trouble than that." Mrs. Pemberton's mouth did something that was almost, and did not quite become, a smile. "You'll be more trouble than that whether you wish it or no," she said. "There's 3 children in this house who eat governesses the way other children eat sweets, and not one of them has slept a full night since Michaelmas. But that is not your concern tonight. Tonight you'll eat, and you'll sleep by this fire, and in the morning we'll see about your boots, since it seems you gave your own away to somebody who needed them worse." Margaret did not ask how she knew that. She only drank her tea, and did not correct the assumption that it had been a small thing, and did not mention that her feet had bled a little on the last mile of gravel, because there seemed no purpose in it. She did not know that the man called Alden stood a long moment outside the kitchen door before he went up to his own rooms, listening to the murmur of 2 women's voices through old wood, and that he had already sent a boy on horseback to the wheelwright's yard to ask, quietly, after a tinker and a sick child under a stone bridge, and to see that a doctor was sent, and that no one was to say who had asked for it. She woke before dawn to the sound of small feet running, 3 sets, fast and unbothered by the hour, and a voice that was trying and failing to whisper, "She's not left yet." Peter said she'd be gone by morning like the last one. I am not a beast. I only said what Mrs. Pemberton said, that ladies who come in the rain don't stay. Margaret opened her eyes to find 3 children standing in a row at the foot of the cot Mrs. Pemberton had made up for her by the kitchen fire, 2 boys and a girl, near enough the same size and face that she understood at once, without being told, that they had been born together. The girl had a smear of jam already at the corner of her mouth, though it could not yet have been 6. The taller of the boys had his father's way of studying a person like a fence line, though Margaret did not yet know whose way that was. The smaller boy hung slightly behind the other 2, as though he had learned that the front of any line was where trouble found you first. "I'm Grace," the girl said, before anyone could stop her. "That's Edmund. He thinks he's in charge. That's Peter. He isn't a beast. I only say it because it makes him cross." She considered Margaret with frank, unhurried interest. "Did you truly give a boy your boots?" "I did," Margaret said, sitting up carefully, mindful of the raw soles of her feet. "Why?" "Because he needed them, and I did not so badly as he did." Grace turned this over as though it were a stone she meant to keep. "The last lady cried when Peter put a frog in her work-basket," she said. "You don't look like you'd cry over a frog." "I expect I wouldn't," Margaret agreed. "I've handled worse than frogs." Edmund, the taller boy, had not spoken yet. He studied her a moment longer, the way his father might have, and then said, with the terrible directness only children manage, Are you going to leave like the others did?" Margaret thought about the mile of road still ahead of her. The hiring 3 parishes off that likely no longer wanted a woman 2 days late and shoeless, and the fact that she had, this morning, exactly nothing to her name but a borrowed blanket and a bowl of porridge she had not yet eaten. "I don't know yet," she said, because it was the truth, and something in 3 small faces relaxed slightly at the honesty of it, as though they had expected a lie and found none. She stayed a week meant to be one night, mending linens for her board while Mrs. Pemberton made discreet inquiries after the position 3 parishes over, and learned, without surprise, that it had gone to another applicant days ago. She stayed a second week, because the Triplets would not eat their breakfast properly, unless she sat at the foot of the table, and because Mr. Alden, who managed the land and appeared to also somehow manage everything else, said the house could use a steady hand with the mending and the nursery both, and that he saw no reason to turn a useful woman out into weather that had nearly killed her once already. She learned him slowly, the way one learns a person who gives away almost nothing. He was not a warm man on the surface, not given to easy talk, and there was a stillness in him that she took at first for coldness, and came, over the second week, to understand was something closer to caution. A man who had been disappointed by people once, in a way that had taught him to watch a long while before he trusted anything. He was in the house at odd hours and gone at others, and the servants deferred to him with a promptness that seemed, the longer she watched it, out of proportion to the duties of a steward, though she told herself that was only the largeness of the estate, and did not think further on it. He watched the children with her, sometimes from the doorway of the nursery, and did not come in, and she noticed it and did not remark on it, and did not know that what he was watching for was whether the patience she showed a stranger's sick grandson under a bridge would hold up against 3 children who had, by design and by grief, made a project of driving away everyone who tried to love them. It held. She did not raise her voice at Peter's frogs, or Edmund's silences, or Grace's small, testing lies. She sat with them through a fever that took Peter for 2 days, and did not once let them see her frightened, though she was, and when Edmund asked her outright, on the 3rd night, whether their mother had gone away because they had been bad, Margaret set down her mending, and told him, plainly, that grief did not work that way, that mothers who loved their children did not leave because the children failed some test, and that anyone who told him otherwise was wrong, and he was allowed to say so to their face. She did not know that Julian Alden, so called, stood outside that door as well, and that this was the moment, more than the bridge, more than the boots, that finished whatever the bridge had started in him. She did not know, either, that a fortnight after her arrival, a wagon of split wood and a sack of meal arrived at a tinker's borrowed room in the village, with no note attached, save the words, from a friend of the road, and that the doctor's bill for a boy's fever had already been quietly paid before it was ever presented. She had given away her boots to a stranger, and thought no more of it. She did not know that the man who had watched her do it had not, since that hour under the bridge, been able to think of much else. The rival arrived on a Tuesday, with 4 trunks and a lady's maid, and an opinion about everything within the first quarter hour. Lady Cordelia Vance was the late Duchess's sister, and she came to Thornwick as she always did, unannounced and treated as though her presence were a favour conferred rather than a visit endured. She was handsome in the brittle, managed way of a woman who had once been beautiful and intended to go on being treated as such by main force of will, and she had a laugh, when something amused her, that came in 3 practised beats, like a bell rung to be heard across a room rather than to mark any real delight. She found Margaret in the nursery within the hour, on her knees helping Grace with a hem, and looked at her the way one looks at a stain discovered on good linen. "And you are?" she said. "Margaret Ray," Margaret said, rising, because it seemed proper, though she did not curtsy, having decided somewhere in the last fortnight that a woman on her knees mending a child's hem owed no one a bow for being found at honest work. "She helps with the children," Grace put in, with the fierce loyalty of the very young. "She doesn't cry over frogs." "How reassuring," Lady Cordelia said, and her eyes went over Margaret's plain grey dress, her reddened knuckles, the darning needle still caught in her hem where she had tucked it for safekeeping, with a thoroughness that left nothing unweighed and nothing kindly assessed. "And where does one find you, when one is not required to look at your hands? Some parish somewhere, I imagine. Some cottage with a leaking roof." "Somewhere of that kind," Margaret agreed, unbothered, because she had been raised poor and had long ago stopped finding shame in the fact of it. "His Grace's household has always drawn a certain calibre of person," Lady Cordelia said, to the room in general, though her eyes stayed on Margaret. "It is a kindness, of course, to take in the deserving poor. One only hopes the children are not made to feel that kindness is the same thing as family. There is a difference, you understand, between the woman one is grateful to and the woman one is meant to become attached to. It would be cruel to blur the two for them. Cruel to her, in the end as well, when she is inevitably sent on her way." The children had gone very quiet. Edmund's jaw had set in a line Margaret was coming to recognise as his father's. Margaret did not answer at once. She finished the last stitch in Grace's hem, bit the thread cleanly, and only then looked up. "Fair is not the same as kind," she said. "There's a difference. I've never asked to be family to anyone in this house. I've only asked to be useful while I'm here, and to leave the children no worse than I found them when I go. If that troubles you, my lady, I expect it troubles you more than it troubles me." The laugh came, 3 beats, bright and empty. "How very plain spoken the poor are," Lady Cordelia said, and swept out, and did not trouble to lower her voice as she went, so that the words carried back down the corridor for anyone to hear who cared to. "Servants make poor company for children of rank. It only teaches them to want less than they were born to." Margaret did not cry. She had trained herself long ago not to cry where it would show, and she did not break the habit now, not with Grace's small hand creeping into hers, and Peter glaring at the empty doorway as though he might set it on fire by looking at it hard enough. It was Julian who found her an hour later, in the cold little sewing room off the nursery, sitting very straight over a shirt she was not, in truth, making much progress on. He did not ask what had been said. He had heard enough of it from the corridor below to need no retelling. "She is not always wrong," he said, standing in the doorway the way he so often did, not quite entering a room he had every right to enter. "But she was wrong today." "I've no complaint to make of her," Margaret said. "A woman may say what she likes in her own family's house. It is not her house," he said, with a flatness that surprised her. Then, as if he had said more than he meant to, he added only, "The children are fonder of you than they have been of anyone since their mother. That is not nothing. I'd not have it undone by an afternoon's cruelty from a woman who has never once knelt on a nursery floor to mend a hem in her life." It was, for him, a long speech, and Margaret found she had no ready answer to it, and so said nothing at all, and he did not press her, for one, and stood a moment longer than was strictly needed before he found some errand to excuse himself with. Neither of them named what had passed between them. Both of them carried it out of the room regardless. The accusation came 8 days later, and it came dressed as a small thing, which was, Margaret would later think, exactly how such things were always dressed. A brooch went missing from Lady Cordelia's dressing table, a garnet thing in the shape of a rose, and by the time the household had finished discussing it over supper, it had somehow become common knowledge, though no one could say who had first said it, that the new woman in the nursery had been seen near that wing of the house on the very afternoon it vanished. Margaret had been near that wing. She had carried a basket of mended linens to the still room, which lay past Lady Cordelia's door, as she did most Thursdays, and had spoken to no one and touched nothing that was not her own to touch. And she said as much plainly when Mrs. Pemberton came to her with a face like a closed door and told her what was being said. "I did not take it," Margaret said. "I've nothing to prove that beyond my own word, and I understand my word may not be thought worth much against a lady's. Your word is worth exactly what it has always been worth in this house, Mrs., Pemberton said, sharper than Margaret had ever heard her, which is more than most people's silver, if you want my opinion of it. But you know how this will go. She'll want you gone before it's looked into properly, and there are those who'll say it's easier to let you go than to make a fuss." Margaret thought of the children, of Grace's hand creeping into hers, of Peter's fierce, useless glare at an empty doorway, and thought that she would rather go quietly, on her own choosing, than be the cause of a fuss that landed, in the end, on 3 small people who had already lost enough. She did not think of Julian at all in that decision, or told herself she did not, which was its own kind of lie, small and forgivable, and entirely her own. She wrote the note that night by a single candle. She did not blame anyone in it. She thanked Mrs. Pemberton for her kindness, and asked that the children be told she had been called away suddenly, and not that she had left because of them, and she left it unsigned with anything grander than her name, and packed the small bag she had arrived with, and meant to be gone before the house woke. She had not accounted for the fact that Grace, who slept lightly and badly since her mother died, had taken to checking, most nights, that the door to the sewing room where Margaret's cot stood was still shut fast, and so was awake, in her nightdress, in the dark corridor, at the exact hour Margaret came down the back stair, with her bag in hand. "You're leaving," Grace said. It was not a question. "Only for a while," Margaret said, which was the kind of lie a person tells a child at 4 in the morning and regrets by 5. Grace did not cry, or not loudly, which was somehow worse. She sat down on the bottom stair, in her nightdress, in the cold, and said, "Then I'll sit here until you don't," and would not be moved, and within minutes Peter had appeared in the doorway above, roused by some instinct twins and triplets seemed to share, and then Edmund behind him, and the 3 of them arranged themselves across the narrow stair like a small immovable wall, and none of them said a single dramatic word about it. They only sat, and would not be lifted, and would not be reasoned with, until the noise of it woke half the house, and brought Julian down in his shirt-sleeves to find a scene he would remember, later, as the moment he stopped pretending to himself that his interest in the woman on the stair was only the interest a steward takes in a useful servant. The theft, as it happened, unravelled itself within the week, though Margaret was not there to see the start of it, having agreed, at Julian's flat insistence and the children's refusal to be argued with, to stay 1 more day while the matter was looked into properly. Lady Cordelia's own maid, pressed by Mrs. Pemberton's quiet, thorough questioning, admitted at last that the brooch had never left the house at all, that her mistress had worn it to the village and lost the pin from its clasp, and that she, the maid, fearing blame, had said nothing, and let the rumour find someone else to land on rather than herself. Mrs. Pemberton brought Margaret the truth of it in the small sewing room, sat down across from her with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been proven right, and then, because she had decided some things ought not wait any longer, told her something else besides. You've wondered, I expect, why the man who calls himself steward here gives orders no steward has the right to give. Margaret set down her mending. I've wondered, she admitted. I told myself it was none of my concern. It's every bit your concern, whether you like it or not, Mrs. Pemberton said. The Tinker family under the bridge, the one you gave your boots to. Their doctor's bill was paid the very night you arrived, before anyone in this house had so much as looked at the boy. The wood and meal sent to them a fortnight later, no note, no name. That was him. He does it up and down 3 parishes and asks that no one say who sent it, and has done since before his wife died, and will keep doing it long after every soul who knows of it is in the ground, because he has never once wanted thanking for it. She paused. He was on the road that evening, child. He saw you under that bridge before you ever saw him. Margaret sat very still. He never said. He wouldn't, Mrs. Pemberton said. It is not in his nature to say a thing when he can do it instead. But I'd not have you leave this house believing him a stranger's steward with an odd habit of ordering the gatekeeper about. You've been watched a good deal more closely, and a good deal more kindly than you knew. The reveal came that evening, in the small sitting room off the nursery, where the fire was always banked warm for the children, though the children themselves had long since been put to bed. Margaret had gone there to finish a mend by firelight, and found Julian already standing at the hearth, his back to the door, and something in the set of his shoulders told her, before he turned, that he had come there to say a thing he had been putting off for a fortnight. "My name is Julian Alden," he said, when he turned. That much was never a lie. What I left out was the rest of it. I am the Duke of Farley. This house is mine, and has been mine since my father died, and every order the gatekeeper obeyed from me that first night, he obeyed because he had no choice in the matter, not because I have any particular gift for being obeyed. Margaret did not speak at once. She thought of the man on no horse she had seen, and understood with a small cold drop in her stomach exactly which man he must have been instead. "You were on the road," she said, "under the beeches." "I was," he said. "I had been out over the flooded field and was riding home, and I came round the bend and found a woman kneeling in the mud, giving her cloak to a child who was nothing to her. I did not make myself known. I told myself at the time it was because the moment was not mine to interrupt. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I wanted to see what a person did when they believed no one of any consequence was watching. It is, I have found, the only test that tells you anything true about a soul. Everyone is generous when they know the Duke is looking. You did not know I was there at all. And so you tested me further, Margaret said, and there was an edge in it now, not sharp, but present. The gate, the house, a fortnight of letting me call you steward. Yes, he said, without flinching from it. I told myself at first that it was caution, that a man in my position cannot simply announce himself to every stranger who walks up his drive and hope her character holds. That was also true, and also not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I liked, very much, being a man called Alden to you, and not a duke. I liked that you argued with me about the children's supper, as though I were only a steward who might be wrong. I have not been spoken to like that since before my wife died, and I confess I was in no great hurry to give it up. He paused. I am telling you now, because I would rather you be angry with me for the truth than grateful to me for a lie. And because, Mrs. Pemberton informs me you very nearly walked out of this house at 4 a.m. without ever knowing any of it, and I find I cannot let that happen twice. You might have told me the first week, Margaret said, quieter now. I might have, he agreed. I am telling you tonight instead, and I will understand if that is too late for you to forgive easily. I do not ask you to forgive it tonight. I do not ask you to answer me at all tonight. I only ask that you know the whole of it before you decide anything further about this house, or about me. He looked at her a long moment, steady, the fire between them throwing his shadow long against the wall. I wanted to see who you were when you thought no one of rank could see you. You did not know how to be anyone but yourself. That is why I am standing here telling you this, instead of letting you leave believing me a stranger with a habit of giving orders. Margaret was quiet a long moment, the fire popping once, low, in the grate. You let 3 children grow fond of a woman you knew. All along, you had the power to send away with a word. I let 3 children grow fond of the only person who has ever knelt on that nursery floor and told them the truth instead of a comfortable lie, he said. I did nothing to engineer their fondness. I have done nothing, in fact. But watch you earn it, plank by plank, the way you'd judge a bridge before you'd trust your weight to it. I did not build that. You did. He did not move toward her. He did not ask for anything at all. I would rather have your anger, honestly given, than your gratitude, because you feel you owe me the debt of a warm bed and a paid doctor's bill. Take whatever time you need. Take a year, if that is what it wants. Your no will be as safe with me as your yes. Margaret looked at the fire a long while before she looked back at him. Thank you, she said, for the truth, late as it came. And he said, quietly, thank you for staying long enough to hear it, and for a moment neither of them moved. 2 people thanking each other for entirely opposite things, and something in the room settled, like a house finding its level after a long wet season. She did not answer him that night. She had told him she needed time, and he had not asked again, and true to his word he did not press her, though she caught him, more than once over the following days, watching her across the breakfast table with an expression he seemed to believe was unreadable, and was not to a woman who had spent a fortnight learning the particular stillness that meant he was thinking hard about something. He had no intention of saying aloud. It was Grace, in the end, who forced the matter, in the artless way of children who have not yet learned that some questions are meant to be avoided. Are you going to marry Papa? She asked Margaret over the mending basket, or only stay and mend things forever? Because Edmund says a duke can't marry a mender, and I said he was wrong, and now we need you to say who's right. Margaret set down the shirt she was hemming. Where did you hear he was a duke? She asked, mostly to buy herself a moment. Everyone knows that, Grace said, with the withering patience children reserve for adults being deliberately slow. You're the only one who didn't. Papa said that was rather the point. Margaret found him that evening in the library, where he retreated most nights with papers he rarely seemed to read, and she did not wait for him to speak first. Your daughter tells me you consider it rather the point that I was the only person in the county who did not know what you were, she said. She is not wrong, he said, setting his pen aside, though I would not have put it to you quite so directly. I've had a fortnight to think, Margaret said. I've thought about the boots, and the bridge, and the doctor's bill you paid before you'd ever spoken a word to me, And I've thought about a man who let his own children love a woman he could have sent away with one sentence, and did not, because he wanted to see whether she'd earn it honestly. She drew a breath. I am not angry that you are a duke. I was angry, for a day or two, that you let me call you steward, while you watched me decide how to feel about a man I thought had nothing. I find, now that the anger's had its day, that it does not change what I decided. I liked the steward. I find I do not mind, on reflection, that he turns out to have a title attached. Something in Julian's face, careful and grave for so long, came apart, just slightly, into the nearest thing to an unpractised smile she had yet seen on him. I would ask you to marry me properly, he said, if I did not think it would sound, from a man in my position, more like a command than a question. So instead I will only tell you that I love you, and that I loved you before I knew your name. When you were only a woman under a bridge giving away everything she owned to people who could never pay her back for it. And that I will go on loving you, whether your answer tonight is yes, or no, or not yet. I have 3 conditions, Margaret said, because she had thought about this too, in the fortnight of mending and watching, and being watched. You are never to conceal a truth from me again, however kindly meant. You are to speak to me plainly, as you did on the road, and not as a duke speaks to people he has decided to be gentle with. And you are to let me keep every piece of myself that I brought into this house, the mending, the plain speaking, all of it. I'll not be smoothed into something grander to suit your rank. Agreed, he said, on all 3, and gladly, and drew off his glove, finger by finger, an oddly grave and careful motion, before he took her bare hand in his, and it was the first time either of them had touched skin to skin, and Margaret found her own hand did not shake at all, which surprised her more than anything else about the whole evening. Yes, she said. It was the only word she needed. He kissed her hand, not her mouth, slow and careful, the way a man handles something he has waited a long while to be given, rather than to take, and outside the library window a rook called once into the dark, and was answered by nothing at all, and neither of them noticed it, being otherwise occupied. Lady Cordelia did not stay for the wedding, which was small for a duke's household, held in the chapel at Thornwick with the tinker's grandson, grown sturdy and pink-cheeked over the intervening months, standing at the back beside his grandfather in a new coat that had arrived, as ever, with no name attached to the gift, though everyone in that chapel now knew whose gift it was. She had gone within a fortnight of the engagement to a house of her own at some distance, her allowance intact, but her welcome at Thornwick made gently and permanently, conditional on manners she had shown no interest in acquiring, and if she wrote letters after that, they were not always opened, and no one in the house thought the worse of themselves for it. A year later, almost to the week, Margaret sat by the same nursery fire where a duke had once told her the truth, with Julian's hand loose and warm around hers, and did not let go, and watched 3 children a year taller and considerably less wild, arguing over whose turn it was to hold the new puppy Julian had brought back from a tenant's litter, with for once his name freely attached to the gift. Grace had a new dress with a hem Margaret had sewn herself, small and even and unremarkable, the way she liked best to work. On the mantel, framed and a little worn now, hung the old grey cloak, cleaned and mended where the tinker's grandson had worn it thin at the shoulder, kept not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the exact hour everything in that house had quietly begun to change. The bridge by the road had been repaired that spring. At Margaret's own direction, and to her own exacting standard, and travellers crossed it now without ever knowing that a duchess had once judged its planks sound enough to stand on before she had ever crossed it herself. It was, Margaret thought, watching the fire and the children and the man beside her who had never once, in a year, asked her to be anyone but exactly who she already was, a fair enough thing for a bridge to be remembered for. Character, after all, was only ever what a person did when they believed no one of consequence was watching, and the truest kind of love was the kind that watched anyway, and stayed. If this story warmed something in you tonight, that quiet ache of being seen for exactly who you are with no one grand looking on, then you already understand why this one mattered to tell. Subscribe to the channel so the next story finds you when it's ready, and tell me, in the comments, what you think Margaret felt in that first moment she realised the steward she'd been scolding over supper was the Duke himself. I'd love to know where you land on it. Until the next story, stay warm, stay kind when no one's watching, and I'll see you soon.